Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sivani from India. So I'm sure most of you would have come across housing advertisements that promise a certain lifestyle. Images of vibrant families, shared spaces, and a sense of community. But just how often does that image truly reflect the reality of housing behind it? This project, Rethinking Urban Housing Density, is located in Hyderabad, a rapidly growing city in India where high-rise housing has become the dominant model here. And the housing form is shaped by a bunch of policies that prioritize vertical growth. One such policy is that of the unlimited FSI. Unique to the city here, it allows for the buildings to go taller as long as certain setbacks are maintained. So this causes an excessive construction within limited land areas, and it puts a major strain on civic infrastructure, especially in the city's core. Another such policy is the 3-meter gap, which is mandated between the units for ventilation. Yet in reality, what happens is that this becomes a simple vertical void between the form. And in most cases, windows face blank walls. So this is how a typical builder would approach the site. Maximize the built-up area, cover the site up completely, and landscape simply occupies what is left of the site in the offsets. So all these factors put together, they produce generic high-rise housing across the city, cookie-cutter designs that prioritize exclusivity and widen the gap between individuals. Housing is treated more as a commodity, a product to be bought and sold, rather than a social good that supports diverse environments. So the challenge here was to find flexibility within these existing bylaws and policies by capping the FSI for a more balanced urban form, by adjusting the voids to see if this common space between the units can be actually used for something instead of just being a simple void, by diversifying these layouts to cater to a more bigger user group. And in his book SMLXL, Remkolas talks about the theory of bigness and how beyond a certain scale, the block simply is an extrusion of the site and it takes the shape of it. And mechanical connections like lifts take importance over architectural connections like staircases. Same phenomenon is observed here in Hyderabad, where the same typical unit plan is multiplied across the site. Coming to the site itself, which is located in Durgam Cheru, it's one of the main city's business districts. And its proximity to workplaces makes it an ideal location for housing. Yet most nearby apartments are 3 BHK and 4 BHK structures. Again, the same typical plan that generally caters to the nuclear family structure. And beyond a certain height, these projects also come with excessive construction costs, which makes it lesser accessible to other family demographics or younger professionals newer to the city. So this is a case where housing in the city center itself becomes inaccessible. It's not made for the people. And this is, again, what is being advertised versus the resultant, which is an indistinguishable tower from countless others in the skyline. But it wasn't always like this, as the house form evolved around shared routines, and community was an inherent part of everyday life. Here, the transitional space wasn't just an in-between zone, but this is where life unfolded, whether it be cooking, eating, sharing meals. This is where everyday life unfolded beyond the house. Conversations, news, gossip spread throughout the community. And with varying climates, this veranda took on different forms and sizes throughout the country, while again maintaining the same function of holding the community together. So we see in modern day housing context, which is missing, the disappearance of this veranda, where there's a clear divide between the private and public. And across geographies for that matter, traditional housing was never just about shelter. It was a response to how people used to live, gather, and adapt to the climate. It was culture. And across all these examples, we see the common spatial reasoning of the shared space, where activities could spill out onto this. What replaces it today is not just uniform housing, but also it results in isolated ways of living. In response to this, the project seeks to humanize this density, to design density and community as a part of a system rather than two separate things. So various factors were considered from macro to micro, all these policies influencing each other at various stages of the design. And the exploration itself began with models from the smallest scale. So the relation between the units and the corridor, how it could intersect with the facade. At the massing level, voids were brought in to see connections in section and elevation. Finally, all these elements added up to the larger scale, where connections were brought in vertically. So this bottom-up approach starts at the unit level, where multiple influencing factors were considered. So these scales range from 40 to 120 square meters. Sizes that are again generally not available in the market, and this opens up possibilities for different user groups and different ways of living. At the next level, the threshold, the relationship between two different units and the corridor itself was explored to see how this intersection as a threshold could be opened and closed, which gives the resident that amount of customization and individuality. And coming to the cluster level, these varying relations between the units itself generate shared spaces. And these spaces shift in function depending on their configuration, which can be accessed through these staircases. So they become decentralized community pockets layered across. And finally, coming to the block level, the resultant, the mass is shaped by what happens from the smallest scale. And since the design approach moves from macro to micro, this building is no longer a simple vertical extrusion, but even the smallest unit here influences the overall form. And in most apartment projects, there's a single large clubhouse tucked away in one corner of the site that holds all the amenities. But in contrast to that, what I tried to do here was to spread these amenity blocks across the site, and the landscape is designed in association with these amenity blocks. For example, a multipurpose hall opens up onto a lawn, a daycare is paired with a play area, and a community kitchen and shops open up onto a dining landscape. And as these are layered as a public ground level, these spaces, these levels are accessible to the broader neighborhood and open for rent. So this helps cross-subsidize the project. So the outcome is a network of connected communities layered through the building, where these terraces could act as stages for interaction, where collective rituals could emerge, and these activities could inform one another. And the blocks are not placed as isolated objects on the site, but it's rather integrated or interlocked with the landscape, where the landscape acts as a continuous ground condition that holds the project together. And as we go up to these semi-public terraces, the nature of the space shifts from more public at the ground level to more semi-public and intimate terraces above. And these threshold spaces again act as modern-day verandas, where the boundary between the private and communal is sort of negotiable. So going on to the ground level, the building sort of lifts itself up to become a more porous and shaded space as an entry to the block. And onto the next, one half of the shaded space is occupied by plinths and seating, while the other half occupies itself as a communal garden. And the semi-open nature of this terrace allows for such an activity to take place. And onto the next, the corridor is not enclosed and movement becomes a part of the shared space. This, for example, this cluster it allows residents to occupy the space for longer periods of time, whether it be for a study session or playing board games, informal gatherings. And although this feels like it's on the ground, this level is on the fifth. And it is designed to be of that scale, so it can occupy daily activities like an outdoor gym to larger collective gatherings like a festival. And as one moves through these terraces, there's a clear line of sight, and the sense of isolation is reduced as the space remains connected visually and spatially. The way the unit plans are also organized on the site are more put into the cluster where they're not isolated objects, but different unit plans come together, which allows for different user groups to coexist within each cluster. And this diversity is visible in the elevation, where all the blocks sort of fit together like a puzzle. And again, in most apartments, the sequence of movement is quite direct. It goes from the basement to the lift to your unit. But what it tries to do is alternative pathways. So in addition to the required pressurized fire staircase and lift core, a secondary outdoor staircase is explored, which connects all these terraces together. So the reliance on the lift is reduced to some extent. The central atrium allows for light and ventilation to enter through, while the internal corridors can look out onto each other, allowing for more interaction. And the connecting corridors or elements between the clusters ensure the residents doesn't necessarily need to return to the ground floor to move between these blocks. And as we zoom out to see the relation between these two blocks, the space sort of goes from more tighter, intimate areas to larger public grounds. And the variation in scale allows for different activities to take place this way. And the way the block is also experienced is not as a single large tower that is separated from the ground, but a more broken up mass that is relatable to the resident. And considering Hyderabad's hot and arid climate, this project avoids sheer vertical towers that is entirely exposed to the sun. The building is designed to shade itself, where these terraces can be occupied for most of the day. The way the blocks are also placed on the site are perpendicular to the wind direction, which allows for the wind to funnel through these blocks and the spaces between. The landscape buffer is layered from the ground and terraces above, which further cools down this breeze. And the terraces in the planter boxes are designed to be with seating that facilitate activities according to that different level. So from the green buffer at the lowest level to the public ground with amenities and higher up to semi-public terraces, this project establishes a vertical hierarchy of shared spaces, taking inspiration from the spatial conditions that used to work. And by tying the project back to the city, it positions itself as a counterpoint to existing housing models, not in an attempt to perfect anything, but to humanize the density we spend most of our lives within. Yet in reality, housing is shaped by forces beyond one's individual control, from the market to the city's policies to social norms. Hence, this project is simply about altering mindsets regarding housing. Thank you.